Hello! In this video, I will be talking about Peter Hahn's dynamic figure class, and I just finished taking it about 2 months ago, and I wanted to share my experience. So I'll start by explaining what the class is, and then what materials and resources I used, and then I'll be sharing my week-by-week homework throughout the class, and then I'll be finishing up with some takeaways and overall thoughts of the class. Peter Hahn's dynamic figure, as the name suggests, is a figure course, but it's not your standard anatomy class. I would say the main focus of this class are building the forms of the figure, positioning and posing the figure, moving the camera around, and then doing all of that in a way that makes the figure look more dynamic as opposed to just a straight-on static pose. In short, we're kind of exploring all of the skills needed to push stuff more in our figure drawings and make them look more visually interesting. So in this class, we do this by first isolating all the different forms of the body and then eventually bringing it all together. And then we practice doing this with different kinds of creative projects. Overall, it's an amazing class and actually a very unique type of figure class that combines a lot of different elements. This is the second class by Peter that I've taken, and I honestly recommend any of his classes, even though I haven't taken all of them yet. This is because he's just a very helpful and dedicated instructor, and you'll be amazed by the quality of his classes. So let's talk materials real quick. This class allowed you to use any materials that you wanted to. A lot of people chose digital. I chose to use 0.5 mechanical pencil simply because I'm not that comfortable with digital, and I prefer using pencil over pen because I can erase and feel more at ease when I'm using it. But later on in the class, I did experiment with a little digital. So this is the paper that I got for the class that Peter listed on the recommended materials. This was just optional as something that we could choose to experiment with, and what I like about this paper is that it's actually very buttery and smooth to draw on, so it's really fun to draw on. And another feature is that the paper is kind of opaque. I don't know if you can see that, but I didn't really end up using that feature, so I'm not sure what that's for. So for study materials, there were 2 books that were my go-to books. The first is Anatomy for Sculptors, and I'm very sorry I don't know how to pronounce the authors' names, but this book is great because it's just chock full of diagrams and pictures of the human figure, so this was super useful to have. And then the second book that was my holy grail for this class was the Figure Drawing, Design, and Invention book by Michael Hampton, and I love this book so much. This book also has a lot of great diagrams, but it has a lot of great simplifications and design breakdowns that I found really useful. And actually, to prepare for the class, essentially what I did was I went through Michael Hampton's book and as much of it that I could, and then I copied down all the drawings and read the writings to try to wrap my mind around everything. And I found that really useful for doing before I took the class. I just really love all the breakdowns in that book, and I have a little bit of figure drawing experience from taking some online classes at the Watts Atelier, but I still wanted to boost my confidence a little bit with figure drawing, which is why I did more anatomical studies from Michael Hampton's book. And lastly, I also got these male and female anatomical models that I found on Amazon for relatively cheap. These were pretty useful to have for the class because it helped me kind of understand the forms better, because you have something to look at in 3D and turn around as opposed to just looking at like a reference image from a book. Alright, so let's jump into the homework that I did for the class. So week number 1, Peter actually covered the torso section and how he simplifies and builds out a torso. So this is an example. Sounds like a kid is screaming outside. So here you see we go from like a simple kind of box-like form, and then we kind of try to figure out the proportions, and then we start adding a little bit more information, and then after that we layer the muscle groupings on top. It's like a 1, 2, 3 step process, or like a however many steps you want to take, and we kind of start from simple and get more complex, and we do this in steps. So there's a specific emphasis on grouping the different sections of muscle together, as opposed to drawing everything so literally. So you can see like all the different muscles here are kind of delineated and grouped together. For our homework, we had to pick references from different angles and positions, but nothing too extreme. So this is my first page. So this isn't how I would normally draw figures, but I really wanted to try out Peter's process and learn how he builds his form. So I tried to stick as close to his process as I could. Here you can see it's like the 1, 2, 3. Starting off just trying to get the proportions right, and then slowly adding more information on top and adding the forms and muscle groupings. I think I remember struggling a lot with the back view because some of the muscles in this lower portion just didn't make a lot of sense to me. Here's more torsos. More torsos here. Some more torsos. So the first half were male torsos, and then the second half were female torsos. So these, I believe, are the female torsos, and it's the same 1, 2, 3 type of process, and trying to find the muscle groupings. It was kind of weird drawing in this way, where the focus was more on construction and applying the muscle groupings. So it felt like I had to think really hard for each drawing, as opposed to just drawing what I see. And also at the same time trying to make everything proportionally accurate. So all of these factors made it really challenging. And also sometimes you don't see like where an exact muscle ends and another begins, so you kind of have to reach into a lot of additional references to try to fill in the blanks because you don't have that full understanding yet of where the muscles should be. So I used a lot of additional reference materials from the 2 books that I mentioned in the beginning. And then I guess I leave little notes to myself. Overall too broad, looks like a man as opposed to a female. And then here we are trying to do more twists and turns, so a little bit more complex than the static poses from earlier. Here I was trying more of a boxy approach to try to make it more 3-dimensional. I think I was pretty happy with this bottom one. Because it was kind of like a really weird pose, and I guess I like how it turned out. Here's some more. So here we had to do some master studies in our homework, where we take the torsos of artists of our choosing, and we try to recreate the torso by building out the forms and muscle groupings. So we're not trying to copy exactly, but it's like we're trying to construct the torso with the forms and the muscle groupings. It wasn't so much about copying, but more about building everything and trying to pick up on what the artist did that was different in terms of the proportions and styling and everything. So here I picked Jeff Watts and Robert McGinnis. This one is Yo Yoshinari and John Asaro. Oops. And then this one is John Singer Sargent. And then this last page, I just tried to do some invented torsos just to see what I could come up with after drawing so many torsos. They're not super accurate, but I remember at the time being really happy with these because I feel like having drawn all those torsos, I stored up a bit of information in my short-term memory that I was able to draw upon, and this is something I definitely wouldn't have been able to do in the past. So I think this kind of mileage that I did for the homework really did help me out here. So that was week 1. Week 2, and this week we did arms, which was definitely a challenge. I feel like I'm going to be saying that every single week, but for me, the muscles in the arms were just a huge mystery, and there's so many of them, and the way that they wrap around and connect with each other and overlap is just really hard to grasp all at once. So we did something similar here where we start from a simple kind of form and proportion, and we try to get the correct proportion and pose, and then we layer the muscle groupings on top. And I used some color pencil to help consistently label where some of my muscles were. And I think the difficult part about the arm is that it can also twist in different directions, and that kind of impacts which muscles you can see. So there's like a supinated and a pronated, and this was the front view. and then there's a back view and then a side view. These two are supinated, and you can see like all the muscles are placed differently depending on which pose the arm is in. So for this week, I had to use a lot of outside help and material to understand the underlying muscles. I don't think the class demos were enough on their own if you didn't have prior experience of analytical anatomy, which was definitely me in this situation. So I had to consult a lot of different books and YouTube videos to understand the arm better. And the most helpful videos I found were by Michael Hampton, and his YouTube videos are a gold mine, and I really liked how he demonstrated constructing these muscles. These were some drawings from references, and you can see the multi-step process of starting out simple with the forms and then layering more muscle groupings on top. So here's just some more arms, and I vividly remembered doing the homework this week because I think I was in a Discord call with some other students, and I was just going on about, oh, I have 30 more arms left, 10 more arms left to do, and I just remember really grinding out the arms this week. So, some more arms. This part of the homework was really interesting. Peter taught us about overlapping forms and foreshortening this week, and there is a difference between the two. So overlapping forms is the arm is posed in a way where you can see one part in front of the other, but foreshortening is more like a scenario where the proportions get really altered because of the camera lens. So if like I get up really close like this, then you get this dramatic effect. That's the difference, I guess, between overlapping and like a foreshortening effect. So the lecture on that was super useful. This is practice with some overlapping forms and just trying to get the right proportions and get the right muscles. It's hard to see all the muscles in these poses. Some more overlapping forms, some more overlapping. We also did some hand studies, so this was me taking some diagrams out of Michael Hampton's Figure Design and Invention book, trying to study the way that he constructs hands. And then this is an example of the foreshortened form. So you can see like this hand is really big here compared to the arm. You kind of have to play around the proportions and see how far you can push something with it still looking visually accurate. So these are some more foreshortened forms. And I think the effect is like really cool with foreshortening. So it was definitely something that I learned to add into my arsenal, I guess. And these are just some copies from some Naruto illustrations by Kishimoto that I thought would be fun because he's utilizing a little bit of overlap and foreshortening, so just playing around with that. Alright, week 3. So week 3 we focused on the lower body and legs, and I actually found myself struggling a lot this week. Something just wasn't clicking about the muscles in the legs that they did for me with the arms. I think part of that was a lack of mileage from this week, so it kind of goes to show like how doing more studies actually really helps you clarify your understanding of the muscles and forms. So actually the reason I couldn't get as much mileage this week was because my husband and I found out that I was pregnant, and we were super surprised and excited. And it's my first pregnancy, so as soon as we found out, we booked tickets to travel to tell our families about it in person. And with all of that happening in the background, it was really hard to commit the time and energy needed to do the homework this week. So I just tried to do as much of the homework as I could. I kind of did some studies where I was drawing the bones and labeling the muscles just for some external help. Here's more from the back view. I remember Peter saying these feet look kind of hoof-like, which I definitely agree with. This was the side view. And then this was more in line with the class demo, where it's more of like a simplified form and then simplified muscle grouping. So this was the front, back, and side view. And after that, it was just drawing some legs from references, trying to get the right muscle groupings here, and trying to get the right proportions. building out the forms with the cross contours and then layering the muscles on top. Here's some more legs. And then this was trying to play around with a Prismacolor colored pencil just to see what I would get, because when I'm using pencil, I kind of use my eraser a lot, so I wanted to see what I could do with the color pencil and how it would come out, and I actually like how it turned out. And then these are kind of like the arm studies where it's more foreshortened. That's what I managed to do for the leg week. Alright, so week 4, we covered the overall construction of the head. Here's a little head diagram that we had to do just to see how the different angles of view and different poses changes how the head looks. This was both an exercise to challenge us to manipulate the forms and also serve as kind of a reference for our homework. And then the rest of our homework, we did studies from references. I'm actually pretty happy with my construction and the overall result of these drawings. I've taken some head fundamental drawing classes from the Watts Atelier online classes. So shout out to all of the Watts teachers and students out there. At the time, I took the classes with Brian Knox, and he's no longer teaching at Watts, but he has his own school now, a Foundation Art School. So I really recommend him as a teacher, and I really liked him as a teacher for learning head fundamentals. I also really liked Eric as a teacher, and I feel like that knowledge really helped me out a lot with the construction because I was already aware of some of the rhythms and then the rules of thirds and stuff like that when constructing the head. So here's some more head drawings. So this part of the homework was really fun because we got to experiment with stylized portraits and how to push certain aspects or features of the head to get like a certain style or look. So these were a lot of fun and low stress because it was less about achieving a likeness and more about experimentation, which I liked. So here's some more stylized heads. So at this point in the class, I think I was actually feeling really burnt out because I think I did most of this homework like the night before, which is never a good feeling or position to be in. Alright, so week 5. This was a totally mind-blowing week. Imagine you have one reference and then you have to use that reference to try to draw the figure in different poses and angles of views. Kind of like one of those spatial awareness tests where you have to turn the object in your mind, but here you have to draw it. So this was the starting reference image, and then the rest, like the second one here, you have to draw from the reference, but you have to turn it in your mind to be that pose, if that makes sense. So here's like a little thumbnail I did to try to see if that kind of looked similar enough, and then here was my attempt. And I think using the cross contours and understanding the forms here was really helpful because it's easier to turn simple forms than it is to turn really complex body parts. This one's looking kind of flat, and I think here I wanted to try a different approach. I wanted to try like a boxy approach, but this is kind of a fail because it's not necessarily in the box. It's kind of like I drew him in front of the box. This week was notoriously hard, and here is me doing more experimentation with trying to use the box. But again, I had trouble placing the figure directly inside of the box. Here's another turnaround attempt that I did of a female figure. This one I tried to be more simple in the construction and just work with cubes and cylinders. Here's another pose, girl fighting. I think this week it was even more important to think in terms of forms and cross contours. And then this last part of the homework, we had to take one of the poses from here and then try to push it in a creative way. I posed it in a way that I liked, and then I kind of just threw some shading on there. Even being able to do something like this was a huge milestone for me at the time, because I wouldn't have been able to do this in the past unless I had the exact reference of the figure in this exact pose with the exact proportion. So I think all of the things that we were doing in the weeks leading up to this week where we break down the individual forms and then rotate it in our minds was really helpful. I'm also trying to use a little bit of the foreshortening effect and playing around with that. You can kind of just see the various concepts and things in the class start to come together. It was a really challenging week, but it was also really fun to push our limits and see what we could do. The next week, we delved deeper into style studies and creativity. We were tasked with choosing one artist and doing a copy of their work to understand their style choices and techniques better. Then we had to do our own sketch in that style as best we could. I'll get into that part later. So the artist I chose was Yusuke Nomura, who's the artist of Blue Lock. And I chose this because I was reading the manga at the time and I was really enjoying it, so I wanted to do something from that. Here's the original panel, and then here's my attempt at recreating it. So this was kind of the step-by-step process of how I recreated it. These are the materials I used. I used a dip pen, black ink, watercolor brush, and then here were some notes that I took of what I was trying to get from the style. Directional lines, trying to show the movement and shading, large high contrast eyes for emotional impact, high contrast colors, flowy ink type effect to add energy to the drawing, simple outlines of the figure. After this, we had to do our own sketch in that style as best as we could. First, we had to do several thumbnails of what kind of posing and action we wanted. These were my thumbnails. The second part of the project is supposed to be done with limited reference, trying to utilize a lot of what we learned in terms of the forms of the body and different positioning and posings. This week, I actually decided I wanted to try digital. I did my final sketch in digital, which I think made it a lot easier to draw, but it also made it less consistent with the style study I did, since the style study was in traditional ink. This week I got an iPad and I got Procreate to do the digital drawing. I'd been eyeing the iPad for a while, so I finally made the plunge this week to get it, and then I could do my digital drawing. It was a lot of fun to experiment with. I really like the versatility. I think my preference is still for traditional mediums right now, but when it comes to planning something imaginative, I don't think anything beats being able to have multiple layers and easily adjust and undo things. This was my attempt. The flow effect is kind of weird looking. I just picked a random brush, slapped it on at the end, I think. Week 7 was another big creative project that we had to do. Essentially, we had a theme. I think the two themes that we had were mechanic and the other one was fighting. And we had to create a scene with two figures. They had to be interacting in some way. Kind of just like a culmination of everything that we learned in the class and trying to display that in a creative manner. This was kind of like my reference board that I used for my drawing. I took a lot of inspiration from this drawing by Takeshi Obata, who's the artist of Death Note, and then the rest were kind of just references that I thought I needed. And this was my final drawing for the week. Overall, I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. This was another digital drawing, so I was still playing around digital, trying to make something that looked kind of ink-like, and I had a lot of fun with this. And I will reiterate, this is not something I would have been able to do in the past. Invent a pose like this and execute something like this. Just didn't have that fundamental practice, seeing the figure in terms of forms and structure. Usually I would be drawing from a reference, so there's no way I could have done something like this without a lot of reference, or like the exact reference going in. I'm really happy with what I was able to take away from this class. So that is the conclusion for all my homework for dynamic figure. So here are some of the biggest takeaways that I got from the class. The first was that I was so surprised at the use of simplifying and grouping as an effective study tool. Instead of getting caught up with all the individual muscles and bones, part of developing a better understanding of the body is to simplify the forms and the muscle groupings. This kind of helped to process what we're seeing and also help us to draw with limited reference and even do a little bit of figure invention. So when you do these types of exercises, it really goes a long way with helping you use limited reference in the future, because you're giving yourself a better understanding of what you're drawing. So in the future, you might not need an exact reference of what you're trying to draw, but you can find something that's similar enough and then tweak it to the way that you want. And the reason you can do this is because you really have a better understanding of what you're drawing, and you're not just relying on copying what you see. So the second takeaway I got from this class, well, I guess more of a experience, was burnout. I was going through my first trimester of pregnancy throughout most of this class, and it really kicked my butt. Pregnancy fatigue is so real, and on top of that, I think I was just burning out from the overall pace of the class. I've since taken a step back, and in the long run, that's okay. I can accept that. I'm trying to build up an art habit again. I pretty much had a stretch of time after the class where all I was doing was just resting and sleeping and not drawing at all. I'm starting small now and trying to work my way back up to an hour a day and then just slowly building on that. I'll skip some days here and there, but that's okay. Now that I'm in my second trimester of pregnancy, I'm actually starting to get a little bit of my energy and motivation back, and I'm feeling up to taking another class. So the next class that I'm going to be taking is a head painting class, which starts soon, and I'm very excited to be taking that. I also know that life is going to change a lot after having a baby, so it's going to be an interesting challenge to see how I can still incorporate art training after having a kid. And the third takeaway that I got was that you should study with other people and go through the art process with other people. During this class, I attended weekly study groups, which were pretty much just people from the class getting together and discussing the homework and any questions they had, and also giving each other feedback on our homework. It was actually really useful because when I was confused about a certain body part, I would ask others, and they would usually have some useful resources and share how they understood it. Also, getting feedback early and giving feedback to others was just really informative. It was also nice to see the processes that other people had when they were working on their homework. Also, I think it's just important in general when you're pursuing something so difficult like art that you involve yourself with some kind of like-minded community. This way, you're not just working by yourself in isolation, day in and day out. It's an important part of keeping that dream alive and well-grounded because you get support from others and you also get insight into what they're working on and how they're feeling, and it really helps to keep you going and serve as a reminder that you're all working towards the same thing. It's kind of like in any really popular shonen anime, the protagonist usually goes through some kind of a training arc. And they're never just training alone, they're usually training alongside peers, and there's this environment where everyone's working hard in their own way, and there's this friendly competition as well as support. So I think it's really important to have community. It makes it feel like what you're doing is a real thing, if that makes sense. Speaking of that, it's been really cool to see all of your comments from my previous video sharing your own individual journeys and experiences. I just want to say thank you so much for the kind words and comments, and thank you so much for watching.